That's a lot of intro for a letter. But when it takes forever to get one, it's kind of nice to have all of that, don't you think? So for the past 4 weeks, we've been in Paul's letters. These are the records of correspondence we have from early Christian communities across the Mediterranean. We started in 1 Corinthians, and then we were in Galatians, and today we're in a new letter, Colossians. Colossia was an ancient city some 100 miles east from Ephesus, where Paul wrote letters to the Ephesians. This is all happening in modern-day Turkey. And in fact, Colossia had an earthquake in 60 CE, so that city doesn't really exist anymore. You can go to the remains of it and walk around, but we imagine that this letter came sometime in maybe 5 or 6 years before that mega earthquake. Paul never actually met the Christian community in Colossia. He had never been there. Epaphras, who is named, this guy Epaphras, who is mentioned, is the founder of the Colossian congregation, and we assume is with Paul at the time of this writing. Or at least he's given a full report of their status, enough to where Paul feels comfortable enough to write. Paul would have heard from Epaphras what was going on, and he was concerned enough to write them. He compliments them, as we hear, on their devotion to Christ, but hopes to steer them gently away from religious practices that he deems questionable. But that's for another day. Today, we're in the beginning of this letter, which is kind of nice because it's very encouraging. And you know, we get the cheerleading section today, which, based on what's been going on in the past week, we deserve. We deserve the cheerleading section. I'm just going to say it. I think we could all use a little encouragement right about now. So we have some recurring themes that we've seen in other letters, these things that we can pinpoint and say, oh, that sounds familiar, that sounds familiar, that sounds familiar. There's the theme of bearing fruit. We hear words of love and hope. We hear of spiritual wisdom and understanding. We hear of strength that alone comes from God, and then that leads to this endurance, this patience, and then of course, joyfully giving thanks to God. So this is the sentence that I really have honed in on us for today. There's a lot to be said, but we're going to focus on this one sentence. May you be made strong with all the strength that comes from God's glorious power. And may you be prepared to endure everything with patience while joyfully giving thanks. So we're going to take this in 3 parts. Part 1 is power, part 2 is patience, part 3 is giving thanks. So the first one, power. For those of you who were at my installation service at the beginning of June, you might remember hearing my preaching mentor, Catherine Robinson, give a good word about power. So I'm going to quote her for you here. She said this: "Every day in the Christian walk of faith, if we are paying attention, we will realize that we have bumped up against the limits of our own power, and the choice that we have is between sinking into despair over the limits of our power or watching for God's peculiar power, what has given us more than we ever knew to pray for." The good news is that God's power comes when we don't have any power left to offer. So friends, when have you bumped up against the limits of your own power and needed to lean on God's power? Think about that. It has been 9 days feels like longer, but it has been 9 days since these devastating floods washed away so many lives in the Texas Hill Country. At least 129 confirmed dead. More than that are still missing. It's hard to grapple with that much loss. To think that rescue workers have been working this entire time for the last 10 days? It's beyond comprehension. This much death and destruction requires so much cleanup, so much strength of will to recover people lost, so much mental and emotional strength in the grief, in the mourning. We are inevitably going to bump up against the limits of our own power and need to lean on God's power. So how does that power show up? Well, perhaps like me, many of you have been hearing from friends and family over the past week, checking in to see if you're okay, offering prayer, comfort, support. I've heard from many all over the country, including those at Brentwood Presbyterian Church in Los Angeles, where I came from in January. They are a people who know loss and destruction. They wanted me to give you their love and let you know that they are praying with us and for us. So here's my big hug from BPC for each of you. I was on the phone with a friend the other day, and we were talking about the losses, and she made this comment almost in passing. She said, God's power is greater than the flood waters. May you be made strong with all the strength that comes from God's glorious power. I want to be clear about something here, just so that there will be no misunderstanding. I don't believe that God caused this flood. I don't believe that God wanted any of those people to die of any age. I don't believe that God wanted us to be humbled or sad so that we would come to Jesus. I don't believe that God causes our suffering. I do believe that God is with us in our suffering. I do believe that God grieves with us, comes alongside us in our anger and devastation, and doesn't leave us to mourn alone. I do believe that God's power is greater than the flood waters. I do believe that God is able to do far more than we could ever hope or imagine or believe. So here's 2 more questions for you, friends. Where have you seen God at work this week? And where have you felt God's Spirit moving in your life? So our second theme is patience. May you be prepared to endure everything with patience, Paul writes. It's interesting to consider the concept of patience 2,000 years ago, when they didn't have anything close to the instant technology that we have today. We think we are impatient in our society, but in Paul's time, as Josh said, getting a letter from writer to recipient, well, don't hold your breath. And in some ways, perhaps technology has made us less patient when we actually have access to all sorts of things that previous generations could not even imagine. Yesterday, your Mission Outreach and Justice Committee had a planning retreat for 2026, which was very productive and gave us a lot of clarity for the future of mission here at our church. One thing we talked about is the frustration we can feel when we feel so passionate about a particular issue or cause, and we want others to feel just as passionate as we do. And often there's that tone. We want others to act how we would act or respond how we respond. And gosh, it just doesn't happen. Sometimes, most of the time. It can really fray at our patience. No wonder the psalmist cried out, "How long, O Lord?" In fact, our psalms are filled with the cries of God's people who feel abandoned, forgotten, and very impatient. Where are you, God? Why have you forgotten me? What are you doing? Why don't you come and do what I want you to do? Why don't you take care of this situation? And while I'm at it, can you also take care of it exactly how I want you to, and also smite those annoying people? But for real, that's in our Psalms. I'm not making that up. The impatience of God's people is literally written into our biblical narrative. It is a part of our tradition. It's pretty incredible, actually. And yet, for Paul to write, "May you be prepared to endure everything with patience," well, we can remember this is coming from a guy who was in prison multiple times, who endured countless mishaps and sufferings, and who knew the difference between patience and impatience. I'm willing to bet. But ultimately, friends, it is because of the power of God that we are able to endure with patience. We don't manifest this of our own willpower, but through the power of God. We are able to endure everything with patience, remembering that ultimately we are not in control, but God is. And finally, we are joyfully giving thanks. We are made strong in God's power, and we are enduring all things with patience, and we are joyfully giving thanks. So here is yet another question for you, friends. In the midst of heartache and sorrow, what do you have to give thanks for today? Someone, Karen Jensen, sent me a video this week of Jen Hatmaker. She's an author and a social media presence, a blogger, and she's from Austin, so this tragedy is very close to her as well. And in the midst of her pain and her tears, she talked about the little things that were bringing her joy in the midst of so much sorrow. And here's what they were. She picked up some local cherries at the farmer's market. She got a library card. She's making dinner for her neighbors regularly. These are small things. These are not epic, mind-blowing things, and yet, these are things for which she is joyfully giving thanks. We give thanks to God not in a shallow way that ignores our pain or our grief. We don't rush through Good Friday and Holy Saturday to get to Easter. We don't pretend that we aren't broken open by sadness. We sit with that and trust that God comes to join us. That others come to join us. That we are not alone, that we are not forsaken, not forgotten, not abandoned. We are together. And in community is power. In community is endurance. In community, we can find patience. In community, we can give thanks to God for the gift of God's presence and God's grace. May you be made strong with all the strength that comes from God's glorious power, and may you be prepared to endure everything with patience, while joyfully giving thanks to God, who has enabled you to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. Thanks be to God. Amen.